Welcome to Leaders of Today, the podcast where we explore the journeys of extraordinary leaders and the impacts they make. Today's episode is a very special one, as I have invited Olivia Howe to interview me about my recent book, A Teacher's Story: How One Act of Leadership Inspired Many. The book is not just a recounting of my time as a teacher, but a celebration of the power of leadership moments, small, quiet acts that ripple outward and create lasting change. In our conversation, I share the story behind my book and why I'm so passionate about empowering teens to step into their own leadership potential. Whether you're a parent, educator, or someone looking to make a difference, you'll know why you need to get a copy of the book, A Teacher's Story: How One Act of Leadership Inspired Many. Now let's dive in.
Hi, Lorraine. How are you today?
Great, Olivia. Thank you for coming today and sharing this opportunity with me.
I am so honored when you asked me to come to interview you about your book on the podcast. I have a copy. I'm going to put it right here so everybody can see it. It's wonderful. I got it. And true story, I got it when we had some family friends over and I sat at the table reading the book. I was like, sorry, I got to read this book. It's such a fantastic book. So let's talk about it.
Yeah.
What inspired you, Lorraine, to write A Teacher's Story: How One Act of Leadership Inspired Many?
Well, it actually goes back a ways. So during COVID, things were really shifting for me personally, professionally. But I really remember it was August. I was sitting out in my backyard with my husband, and he was getting ready to go off and do his hobby that he did every day. I looked at him and I said, I don't have a hobby. I don't have a hobby. And that got me thinking after that statement, like, what is it that I want to do? And I said, I'm going to write a book. So this is August 2020. I declared it and I said, I don't know what I want to write about, but I want to write a book. So my journey as a professional has really shifted. I was a teacher. I left teaching. It was not an easy break for me. And as I transitioned to the work that I'm doing now, which is leadership coaching for young adults, the teens that I coached in my classroom, I started to recognize that one of the reasons why I needed to leave teaching was because I was so disheartened. I was so lonely. I was so isolated. I loved being in the classroom with my students, but everything else just felt so disconnected. And so through leaving teaching and starting this business, one of my missions was to help teachers. I didn't want anyone to feel the way I felt at the very end of my career. And I didn't know it was the end of my career, but I was like sensing things, and then something happened that really meant that it was the end of my career. So I wrote this book because I wanted to empower teachers to know that it's possible to empower every student in their classroom.
I love that. So how did your experience as a classroom teacher impact you becoming a leadership coach and then also author?
Yeah, I don't know exactly, but I want to say that part of the journey was learning that teaching wasn't what I thought it was, and how I had really envisioned myself as that person in the front of the room, declaring the information, disseminating information to my students, and really being a deliverer of information. And I had the opportunity to be taught by one of my students. We did this event at my school where students taught teachers how to dance. We called it Dancing with the Staff. So we had students choreograph our routine. And I actually was just reflecting on that experience recently, that was the moment where it shifted for me. I wasn't the only one with knowledge in that classroom. And how could I think I was So that moment where that 14-year-old girl taught me and my enormous tall dancing partner how to do a routine, and we did it in front of a full auditorium. It was an incredible experience, and I knew from that moment, like, I couldn't go back to the way I thought teaching was. So that was one experience, and then another experience and many more that I had really opened my eyes to every body in that room has value, and every person brings content, brings knowledge, whether it's how to do something, what to know. We're all coming into this space together, and it doesn't have to fall completely all on my shoulders to be the one who guards and disseminates the information.
Yeah. You know, what I love what you're saying is that you held yourself accountable, right? You said, something's not right here. I'm not teaching the way I want to teach. I'm not, managing the classroom the way I want. I'm going to change something about myself, which is really hard for a lot of adults to do. Right? So how did your experience really with education and learning how to kind of hold yourself accountable and all of those things come into play when it came to writing this book for teachers? Like, what do you want teachers to know about this book?
Well, it's raw, it's honest, and it talks about a lot of the lessons that I learned. And I call them lessons lovingly now. But at the time, they felt like failures. They felt like mistakes. They felt like I was the one doing wrong. And as a people pleaser and a perfectionist, recovering all of
Yeah.
those things, teachers feel those pressures of being perfect in that classroom, not making mistakes, not showing any vulnerability. And every time I tried and did something that was out of the norm or out of what we're expected to do as teachers, I felt like I was in trouble and I felt like I had made a mistake. And I can remember those feelings so strongly. And so part of, I said I don't want any teacher to feel the way I felt. Part of this journey that I describe in this book is that you aren't alone, but you feel alone as a teacher. And how do you create that community? The school that I started at and spent the majority of my career started out as the most wonderful community. And through the years and transpositions of administrators who actually, frankly, didn't hold themselves accountable for their mistakes and their integrity, that's what really opened my eyes to what it meant to teachers to have their administrators hold them accountable. And then that trickled down to me realizing if I wasn't willing to hold myself accountable, if I wasn't willing to be vulnerable, if I wasn't willing to make mistakes, how would I expect any person, any child, any teen, anyone to come into my classroom and feel like they could do that?
Absolutely. So take us through the book, Lorraine. What is this book about? Why would somebody buy this book? Sell me on this book, Lorraine.
Sell you on this book.
Yes.
So I am a mom. I am a former coach. I was an advisor. I was a teacher, but I didn't see myself as a leader, and I didn't see my students all as leaders. And so I want a teacher to read this book and know that there are ways to empower all the kids in your classroom. The ones who really irk you, the ones you don't think are even there and you don't notice them, and all of the ones in the middle, the high flyers, the low achievers, every one of them, like I said, has value, and you just have to find the spark for them. So through this book, I take you through experiences of many different types of characters of students that you will relate to. And I give you the story behind how that child showed me the leadership
Right.
abilities that they have. And so it's it's a pathway for a teacher to be able, and parents to be able
Mm-hmm.
to see their own children, see their own students in the students that I write about, and really counter the narrative that they're not leaders. And it's it gives you ideas on how to empower them. It gives you reflections on the way you see kids, and it gives your students, it gives you prompts to ask your students about how they see themselves, how
Mm-hmm.
they see their peers, and how we can shift the mindset around what we believe a leader
Yeah.
really is.
It's so funny because I was a teacher too, and I feel like now that I'm working with you and we're talking about leadership so much, I'm like, wait, we never taught this to kids. Like, we
Mm-mm.
just don't teach this in the classroom. Okay, so that is very compelling, Lorraine, and it's why I bought the book. It's also a beautifully written book. I mean, it really is. One of the reasons I love this book, and something I think you did really well, is those examples, right? And I think that for a lot of teachers, they're going to pick this up and go, oh, I have this kid in my class, right? Now I know this kid. And then the journey that you take them through of like, this is the example of the kid I worked with, this is what I did with them, and this is how you can do it with them, is so relatable and attainable. I truly think this is going to become just a staple book in so many teachers' classrooms. So what would you say to a teacher who has a kid in their class that they're struggling with leadership or with connecting? Because right, leadership like this, what you're doing is connecting with the kids, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
what I love is you take such a holistic point of view of these children, right? You're like, why are they doing this? What is this, about? And you also lead obviously so many great workshops, and you're working with kids hands on.
Mm-hmm.
What encouragement would you give a teacher to then have them pick up this book if they're struggling right now?
I think the biggest piece of encouragement is, even if you've already made a mistake and you've already disregarded somebody as a leader, it doesn't mean you can't shift that mindset. I tell lots of stories of kids in this book who I will say I dismissed as leaders. This kid who really pushed my buttons, the class clown that I couldn't get to sit down and do what I needed him to do. Many of them are boys. It's funny to
Mm-hmm.
me to think about how often boys were not the leader that I expected to be a leader, but they were leading in their own ways. And that just reimagining what you believe to be a leader. A leader does not have to have a title. I believe that for many years. In fact, only in the last 2 years did I claim the role that I am a leader, because I'm telling kids the only requirement to being a leader is making a decision. And buying this book or listening to this
Mm-hmm.
podcast,
Mm-hmm.
you're making decisions. So you are a leader. You have to claim that role. And then the students who are looking up, literally looking up to you,
Mm-hmm.
can now identify themselves as leaders.
It's a
So
little bit
that's
like, yeah, it's like gentle parenting almost, right? Like, so like you
mm,
have to like gentle parent yourself, right, before you can know how to
yes.
speak to your children. I just love that so much. Is there an example of a story that really moves you from the book?
I mean, they all are really, really powerful, and memories that I hold so, so dearly to my heart. But the one that has been coming up often and is coming up in the work that I'm doing now is is JJ. And JJ was an immigrant child. He's new to America. He doesn't speak the language. And we identified him as a leader. And he was like, no, I'm not a leader. But he stepped into leadership. And the impact of him taking that risk, calling himself a leader or a mentor, allowed him to have other kids who looked like him see themselves as a leader, and the ripple effect is just astronomical.
Mm-hmm.
And like I said, this is happening more and more in the work that I'm doing now. I'm
Yeah.
working with challenging students, students who have been deemed problems. I'm working with students who struggle with mental health. Like we don't associate them with leadership because
Right.
they're struggling.
Right.
But them stepping into leadership allows kids who feel the same way they do, see themselves like that. It says to them, you too, you can be a leader. And it's so powerful.
Yeah, it really is, because I think so long we've equated high grades with leadership, right?
Yes.
And that's really what it came down to. What are the benefits of coaching students like this into a leadership position?
There's really no no downside, except it requires you to believe in your kids. And that requires a little bit of courage. It requires vulnerability. And like I talk about in this book, it actually requires you to take a little bit of risk of your own. Because when I was running a student leadership group in my school, I realized that there was this disparity. We were encouraging kids with high grades and who were involved in lots of extracurricular. We were encouraging them to step into this leadership position, and it sent this message to the rest of them that they weren't good enough. And I started to like pull these kids in who would say, no, 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 I'm not a leader. And I said, yes, yes, come. And they made mistakes. And so that risk that
Yeah.
I took, I will tell you, was so hard. And sometimes I felt like that was the towel that I was willing to throw in. Like, okay, maybe I'll just pick the perfect ones. I'll just pick
Right.
the ones who are always going to do the right thing so that I didn't feel like the reflection was on me. And so
Right.
that's the downside. The benefits outweigh that so much. It was hard for me to know that at the time. I was very self like deprecating and very like, you
Yeah.
are bad, this is bad.
Yeah.
But I now have lots of kids out in that world with a ton of courage, a ton of resilience, and a ton of ability to solve problems in ways that not many people can.
Yeah, and your ego can't be in it as a teacher, and that's really really hard for a lot of teachers. Is there anything else you'd like to share about the book before we go?
There was just one thing that I wanted to make sure that I shared. When you take that risk and you feel alone, there's a passage that I open up about and how that really felt for me. And it actually came because my mom, who was a teacher, reflected to me when she read this book that when she got to the section of the encouragement I share of like taking that risk and being vulnerable, she said it was too close to home for her and she didn't want to read anymore because she remembered the feeling of isolation. And so I adjusted that whole section to really reflect that feeling. And so I write this and I say, this book was written not only to help you empower your students, but to empower you as an educator. I believed in what I was doing, but I didn't always have a mentor to guide me through that challenge. I also lacked the confidence to push back when administration questioned allowing the imperfect students to lead. I knew I was challenging the norm, and while my heart was strong, my voice was weak. And so I want to reflect that what you're doing is hard. And you're not alone. And I hope that in reading this book, you see yourself as well as you see your students and know that there is a path through. And if you're worried that there's no path through, to reach out to somebody like me. And I will tell you that those days are hard, but you will find a way through. And every time you do, you help your students see that you are resilient, which gives them the courage to be resilient too.
Oh, love that so much. Who should be reading this book, Lorraine?
Well, it's written From my perspective as a high school teacher, I think it's really, really powerful for middle school teachers and even elementary
Oh,
school
yeah.
teachers. If you can see your students as leaders and equitably leaders across the board, then you are creating a culture where everyone knows that their decisions matter. If not for the entire class, they matter to them. And I think it's really important and a good read for parents of teenagers who feel like their kid has been ignored, has been left out of that leadership space, and it gives you hope. I mean, the book was written to feel like there's hope and we can do this.
Oh, I love that so much. Where can people buy the book, Lorraine?
It is available on Amazon, and I have a workbook that goes with it. So if
Ooh.
you're reading the book and you're like, hey, I have a kid like this, I want to empower them, I don't know what to do, get the workbook. The workbook is the juice behind this book. And when I was writing the book, I realized that I wanted the workbook to be in partnership. So if you buy the book, I encourage you to buy a workbook and think of that kid and give it to them as soon as you're done reading the book, or as soon as you recognize there's a kid who needs this. I remember teachers who had an impact on me. I can name them to you now. I did not say to enough of them how much they impacted me. And so when a teacher feels like I'm not making a difference, I just want you to remember the teachers that you have had that have impacted you and think to yourself, how many of them have I reached out and connected with?
Yeah.
You know, it's not
Yeah.
something that we think about doing. We just realize sometimes decades, 3 decades
Yeah.
later, that teacher made a difference in our lives. And are we going to go back, 30 years later and say, hey, Lorraine or Miss Connell, that was such a great class. I didn't
Yeah.
realize, it's 30 years later. It almost feels like it's not appropriate to do that. So there are so many students that come through your classroom door that you are impacting that will never tell
Yeah.
you the impacts that they've had. But if you can see the light in some kid that is not shining and you hand them that workbook, you're actually providing them that thing that we find out 30 years later
Right.
is the power that teacher gave you.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, I 100% think every school, every community should have multiple copies of this book. It is so wonderful. Lorraine, we're so proud of you. It is a fantastic book. If you're listening to this, go to Amazon. Go to Amazon, pick up a copy of the workbook. It is a beautiful book. It's easy to read. It's light to carry. You can bring it to, sit in the car and read it while you're waiting in the school pickup line. Put it in your
Yes.
classroom. Share it with people. Make it a book club book, because this is really going to really, really impact the way that we lead and teach
Yeah.
kids. So
I wrote it to be a quick read because as a teacher, you don't have a lot of time.
this is
Yeah.
really quick to the point, and it's just fantastic. So amazing work, Lorraine.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining me on this inspiring episode of Leaders of Today. I hope my story reminds you that leadership isn't always about grand gestures, but often about the moments that help someone see their own power. If you're inspired by what I had to say, make sure to check out the book, A Teacher's Story, and learn more about the work at Peers Not Fears. All the details will be in the show notes for you. Until next time, let's keep leading with purpose and passion.